Hello everybody. Today I'm going to have a brief conversation with Mr. François Burgat, famous French political scientist, Arabist. Our topic is Islamophobia, its different manifestations. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm most grateful to you.
Thank you.
Today, during the panel discussions, we have noticed this concept, French Islamophobia. There are competing narratives, of course. There are elements, different elements. For example, some people say that there's no Islamophobia in France, there is a fear of Islam. Some people say there's a racism against Muslims. Could you give us a definition of French Islamophobia?
Thank you for allowing me to express some of my conclusions. Now, let's make it clear. When you are addressing such an issue, such a complicated issue, we ought not to draw lines black and white. But if we want to simplify or make it easy, I will say that there are three competing paradigms to explain the French Islamophobia. The first one is the most simple one. It's a competition between dogmas. You know, the French look at themselves like they are Christians, and here comes a religion. The second one is the specificity of the French society. Since the revolution, we thought that we had succeeded expelling church, at least, not faith, but at least church, religion, out of the public sphere. And so you will hear some French say, I have no problem with Islam, but I don't want to see Islam in the public sphere. So this is the very specificity of the French Islamophobia. And this is the difference toward the UK and the US. If you wear, or if your wife or your daughter wears a hijab in Canada, in the US, in the UK, and she wants to be a civil servant, or a champion in sport, or a lawyer, there will be no problem. She will be welcome. In France, no. Okay? On the US dollar, it is written, "In God we trust." On our banknotes, forget it. Okay? God is not allowed in the public sphere. Nevertheless, I do not consider that these two background possible root cause are the main ones. I consider that the main root cause is what you have labeled racism against Muslims, more than fear of a competing dogma, which would be Islam. Most of the French society, before you label them as a Christian society, you should say they are a de-Christianized society. Okay? Moreover, when you see the religious activists, the Christian activists, they are not the core of the violence, anti-Muslim violence. There are still a few bridges between believers. Okay? The root cause, I consider, comes from the colonial history of France, not its republican history, not its religious history. I consider that it comes from the fact that a Muslim is not, before all, someone who promotes a dogma which is not the Christian dogma. He is not someone who wants to appear as a Muslim in a society which thinks that it has moved beyond the visibility of religion. It is someone who represents societies which we have been in a situation of domination upon during the colonial period. And when I want to wrap up the contemporary history, I would say it has to be put in the frame of decolonization. The first generation of those who became French citizens due to the colonial history, they could not speak French. The second generation, they could not write. The third generation, they did not knew the codes of communication. The fourth generation, since I would say 10 years, they are brilliant, they are intelligent, they are efficient, they raise their voice, and they are asking two things. They are asking the true content of these rights which are linked to their being French. And moreover, they are asking the right to participate in writing the history, the common history they have with France. And this is unacceptable. Let me give you one last example. If these people, former colonized, they are of Muslim background, we shall label them Islamist or fundamentalist, okay? If they happen to be black people from under the Sahara societies with a Christian background, we will in the same way refuse their claims, and we will label them racialist. Racialist or Islamist, the common denominator is that we do not accept the fact that we have moved out beyond this state of full hegemony which we had during the colonial period.
As I understand from what you have explained, that it's not the French Republic's robust secularism, but its colonial past, which plays an important role in shaping the present attitudes. Thank you very much indeed for that explanation. What I also wanted to ask you, when we talk about Islamophobia, it is something inside society, inside government. Is it visibly institutionalized in France or not?
I wish I could answer no, it's not, but I am afraid since 2020, I am among the minority of those who have written we have a state Islamophobia. Why? Due to political circumstances, very specific political circumstances, President Macron, right after he was elected for the first time in 2017, he realized that if he wanted to be re-elected, he could no longer rely upon the center-left electorate. He had to face, I don't know how you say it, this yellow jacket kind of protest. So he realized that the voices in the ballot boxes that he could expect, he would have to look for them on the right side of the political landscape. So very cynically, I don't know what's inside the heart or the brain of President Macron. I know that he is absolutely cynical. So all of a sudden, late 2020, we heard him move, embracing, adopting the vocabulary and the theory and the representation of what was limited to the extreme right or to the right before. So it became a government discourse. And I like to summarize it by saying that we used in France to criminalize, and there was some legitimacy, the actions of a minority of Muslims, labeled radicals, or call them jihadis, or okay? We have moved to a period of time when we tend to criminalize not the actions, not of a minority, but the opinions of a majority. And I could give you many examples. If you are labeled political Islam supporter, your association, the institutions of the Muslim society in France, they can be dissolved from one day to another. The worst example is what was labeled CCIF, Collectif contre l'Islamophobie en France. I mean, to mobilize against Islamophobia. These people were, I would say, like you and me, neither activists nor specifically religious people, and their association has been dissolved. And the day it was dissolved by the judiciary, by the Ministry of Interior, and not opposed by the judiciary, I wrote myself an article which you can find on Middle East Eye. I said France has moved beyond out the state of law.
It's very clear that institutional anti-Islamophobia, on the basis of your explanation, does exist in France, which is quite saddening. And you mentioned 2020. That's the year when the Second Karabakh War took place and Azerbaijan defeated Armenia. And since then, relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia have been very problematic. Do you see a connection between Macron's policies towards Azerbaijan, which is a Muslim majority country and secular country, and this particular trend which we discussed before? Do you see a connection between French policies towards Azerbaijan and those tendencies?
I hate to comment upon a conflict where I'm not really specialized, but what I will tell you is that when you want to do politics in France, if you oppose, criminalize whoever, country or individuals who are labeled Muslims, you win. You make a profit. I could move your example to the anti-Turkish trend in France, which is very strong, anti-Erdogan. And it is always labeled, it is not labels in the field of politics. Turkey is very strong and opposing my interest in, no, it's Islamist government, you know. And this trend, we must deconstruct it. It is a process of over-ideologizing any opposition, any resistance, to withdraw from the political arena. And a few minutes ago, I used this example by General Ariel Sharon in 2001. Very often you go into the Israeli-Arab conflict and you see archetype of this example of depoliticizing. Ariel Sharon said to the world in 2001, you have bin Laden, we have Yasser Arafat. He did not even refer to the Islamic resistance. Just the guy who is opposing me is linked to the most extremist or considered as such Islamic militant. This process you have, and indeed, no question, it is part of the explanation of the opposition to the Azerbaijan narrative during this conflict. There is no question about this.
And also, France, the country, there's a substantial Muslim minority, I think between 5 and 6 million Muslims living in France. And this sort of Islamophobia, do you think that the fact that there's so many Muslims there and this Islamophobia, these two things are connected with each other in one way or another?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, no question. I mean, the process of criminalizing Islam, again, sometimes I say, let's get rid of the word Islam. Just let's put into social, political context this process, and then it becomes much clearer. Before they were stigmatized as being Muslims, Algerian workers were stigmatized as Arabs.
Right.
Then sometimes in the 70s, the Arabs have become Muslims, but it's the same phenomenon. We were in a situation of hegemony upon the society, and they raised their voice. We were building cathedrals in Algiers. They are trying to build small mosques in France. Okay, and I like to say, my personal experience, people forget why we have Muslims in France. And I like to give a family example. In the mid-60s, I come from the French Alps, and in the French Alps, you have factories looking for hydroelectricity, the electricity of the dams. Okay, my father was working in a huge steel factory. One day I visited the factory. He said, you see these buses over there? 6 buses, I can remember, brown buses, round sides. He said, every week we send them to an area of Morocco which is labeled the Rif. Rif means the campaign, you know, this area of Morocco. And they come back full of workers. And if we had not have these workers, the Sharika, the company, will not be as great as it is today. This we have totally forgotten. We have totally forgotten that there has been very voluntarily policies of importing Muslims. They were workers, they become Arabs, then they are Muslim by the time some kind of tension raises. So yes, of course, the core of the difficulty with France and Islam is that our relation with Islam was in the Islamic world. We were occupying the Islamic world. All of a sudden, and we were not only present there, we were in a situation of hegemony, from Napoleon in Egypt to the French in Algeria, to the French in Tunis, to etc., etc. And all of a sudden, the encounter is no longer in Algiers or in Tunis, it's in Paris.
So
And
inside the country.
Yeah, inside the country.
And you gave us a very detailed explanation of French Islamophobia and its distinct qualities. Do you think, although French Islamophobia is shaped by France, by its France's relations with those countries and by post-colonial history, but do you think that this particular notion could actually spread within the confines of entire Europe, and French Islamophobia could become a wider pan-European notion? Do you think, is this such a thing possible?
It has already occurred.
Occurred already?
It has occurred already. Yeah. If you see what's going on in Italy, if you see what's going on in Austria, if you see
direct
what's
impact
going
of the French influence?
No, not necessarily. I like to blame my country, but you know, I don't think my country has an influence on what has happened in Sweden or in Italy. No, it is a period of time when Europe is moving away from its previous hegemony, okay? Right. It was a different story for every country, but there is a common denominator. And we may already say that what is happening in France has already occurred, or might more or less. Well, they are good news sometimes. The situation in Spain is not what it is in Italy, okay? The situation in France is not what it is in the UK. Once again, in the UK, if you are sick, you know, you have a turban and a bird, no problem.
It's not a problem.
You can be a civil servant, you can be a policeman. So there is indeed a specificity of the French, which mistake the values and the symbolic signals that you extract from your personal background. If you are a Sikh, okay, you have your own belief, but it does not prevent you to support shared values, because of course my theory is that Christians, Muslims, Jews have common value, the humane background of the values, the main humanistic values, they are common. What is the difference? Am I capable or not of respecting my own values? I remember interviewing an Islamist leader in Jordan 25 years ago, and he said, François, if the West had been respecting its own values, we would all be Westerners. Okay, so and the other difference is that this Arab dictator, he has values. He is a Muslim, but he's not respecting his values. So the difference is my ability to respect my values first, and then the cultural material that I am going to mobilize to express the legitimacy of these values. Short example. If we want to support social justice, if I am a Catholic, I will say, Jesus has said. If I am Muslim, I will say, in the Quran, I have read. If I am a communist, I will say, Lenin has said. But at the end of the day, we can support the same social justice value, okay? And sometimes we tend to mistake, and we French will not accept that someone who has a hijab can support common values. That's the...
Thank you very much indeed. And my last question is, today we are in Baku, and today is a conference dedicated to Islamophobia, and you realize that in Azerbaijan there is a growing sense that Baku should be more assertive and coercive about this issue of French Islamophobia. How do you see Azerbaijan's moral entitlement in 2023 to speak openly about something which we did not speak about, let's say, 10, 15 years ago?
You know, my point, I will be very direct. I think that the only language that the French or any European country will understand is the language of balance of forces. I mean, so it's very nice that we meet here. I feel so comfortable moving away from the atmosphere, very violent atmosphere on the social networks, which I face daily. So I say, oh, I have friends, we share the same opinion. But I think that there will be no efficiency as long as the states themselves do not raise their voice. I say, okay, we are going to do business in this field, but I want you to stop fueling hostility against my fellow Muslim citizens. So it is important. It must be. It shows the direction toward which we must all move.
Because something has fundamentally changed in Azerbaijan as well. That's the reason why I wanted you to reflect upon it. And I already said that I'm going to ask a last question, but this one is going to be really the last one. People like you are in minority in France, as I understand.
Yes.
But
I'm afraid.
What does the future have in store for people like you? For those people who question the central narrative, do you think that the balance of shift inside France, when it comes to this issue, will change as well in favor of people like yourself?
I hope so, but I'm not convinced.
You're not sure?
I'm not really optimistic. Now, for the last 20, 30 years, I've seen things going worse and worse. Once again, very briefly, we used to criminalize the jihadis. Then we have started criminalizing the Salafis, you know, the guy. Then we have moved to Ikhwan al-Muslimin, Muslim brothers. Then we have moved beyond. And then now we are in the field that you and me willing to express a view which is not the mainstream, we can be criminalized. And for this reason, I'm not very optimistic, but I do hope that all what I have told you today is wrong, and that the future will bring a totally different issue.
Thank you very much indeed, François Burgat. I'm most grateful to it. It was absolutely fascinating to have a conversation with you. Thank you for your interesting comments, and hopefully in the fullness of time we'll have again chance to converse.